Okay, so I want to give you one more example of word order in Hebrew. And this is an example that both follows and does not follow the typical pattern that I identified here. So the first half of this verse, excuse me, does follow the expected word order. The second half doesn't. And so we'll be able to compare the two of them together. You'll perhaps recall this verse from the intensive. This is Genesis chapter 1, verse 5. This is at the very end of the first day of creation. After God has created light, he has beheld the light and saw that it was good. And now he's naming the light. He first separates, in verse 4, he separates the light from the dark. And now here in verse 5, he's naming both the light and the darkness. So we start here at the end. We have our normal Vav consecutive form. It's a Pa'al or a Kal. And Vav consecutive, so it's an imperfect, and it's third masculine singular. And we begin with our verb, right? Vayikra, Vayikra, and he called. Kara, the verb, I don't believe you've had it in your vocab yet, but it's a verb that means to call, to read aloud, to recite, to cry out, or to call, as in to name. So Vayikra, and he called. There's your verb. Now our subject gets more explicit, Elohim, and God called. Okay, so you got our verb, now our subject, now we have our indirect object. Laor, literally to the light. God called to the light, but really it's a way of identifying that the light is the indirect object. And God called the light Yom, which is the actual name given, day. Okay? So we've got our verb followed by our subject, followed by our indirect object, and then Yom, which is not the direct object, but is what God actually ends up calling the light. Okay? And here we have our second half of the verse, which the word order is changed. Here, ve la hoshech, we start with our indirect object. See the preposition here, lamed, is identifying the indirect object, ve la hoshech, and the darkness, which relates to light. They both have the preposition lamed, so they're functioning similar in the sentence. Vela hoshech, and the darkness, kara, he called, right, which is related back here to kara. This is just a pa'al affix form. You can see the kametz and the patach, pa'al, kara, right? He called. So, and to the darkness, and the darkness, he called Lila, night. So, the second half modifies this word order by removing the subject altogether. It doesn't explicitly name the subject because it's implied already by Elohim in the first half of the couplet, and so it's redundant to include again. Subject is left off, but it begins with the indirect object and then goes to the verb and then the rest. So, Vela hoshech kara laila. Now, why might the author or the teller of this poem, why might they have changed the word order here? Well, I don't know if it necessarily has a lot of theological significance that the word order has been modified, but my sense is that it's primarily for poetic reasons. So, and God called the day, or the light, day, and the darkness he called night. So it's just a way of playing poetically, which is a way of making it sound better to the ear, and it adds some aesthetic beauty to the report, which a poem is very interested in aesthetic beauty and oral beauty. The aesthetics of the eyes in creating an image, but also the aesthetics of the ears in making something beautiful to listen to. Not only in terms of the sounds used, like alliteration and other things, but also just the word order and sort of playing with the grammar, which will happen often in poems, which actually makes the Psalms somewhat challenging to translate at times, because it seems like grammar doesn't mean anything at times. They can put any word in any form, in any order that they want. But here we have an example of a modified word order in a verse that's somewhat familiar to you. And some of you might be translating this for your A work, and in which case I've given you a little heads up.